So about a month and a half ago, I had a congregant come to me and ask me a really good question. And the question was, Pastor, you talk a lot about theology and spirituality and the differences between the two, and you always know that spirituality is super important. And I said, yeah. They said, okay, so, and you also always say that spirituality is as diverse as the people of God, because it's about how the individual links to God, and that's as diverse as, well, we are. And I said, yeah. I said, so what do you do, or what do you tell a person who is trying to be spiritual, but seems to only run from one fad to another, trying something, and all of them always falling short? They're always exciting and interesting and new, and they sort of work for a while, and then they don't really get you anywhere, so you try something else, and you try something else, and you try something else, and years go by, and you never actually seem to get going on a spiritual journey. You just keep restarting, but never getting past the starting line, or at least not by much. Is there something universal in the realm of spirituality, or spiritual health, or spiritual wellness? And so I talked to him, and I've been waiting to talk to you all about this because I think this was an incredibly good question, because I think a lot of folks get stuck out there wanting to be spiritual, but sort of just revving their engines, spinning their wheels, and not really going anywhere. And today's Ephesians text directly addresses, I think, the most common reason that happens to folks. Now, it addresses it in this really weird way that I don't think translates for people very well. It's what it's trying to get at is this idea of what we would call now emotional regulation. That's what it's trying to get at when it says, you folks are being like children flying from one doctrine to the next, sort of scattered in the wind, always rushing but never getting anywhere, at least on a spiritual way. And I think what they're really speaking to, again, to move it into more modern terms than the whims of doctrines of its time, is to move it to the term that psychology uses, which is emotional regulation. Now, I'm going to use a little bit of jargon, so I always like to define jargon just so I don't lose folks, because jargon is jargony. And if you don't know the jargon, that's no reflection on you, it's just jargon, right? So the jargon we're using today is to basically say, we're going to be talking about being emotionally regulated and why that's important for spirituality. The other options, by the way, you can either be emotionally regulated, you can be emotionally deregulated, or you can be emotionally repressed. Emotionally repressed is when you don't feel your feelings, and therefore they just bubble over all of a sudden, good or bad. Those of you who grew up with folks in the parents who may be in silent or World War II generation, you guys know what folks trying to live out an emotionally repressed life looks like. It is not healthy. So we're not saying that, and unfortunately the church backed up emotional repression for a very long time, and that was really unhealthy and a bad decision by the church. But then you have emotional deregulation. Now, emotional deregulation is the sort of person, is the sort of thing every kindergarten teacher, every preschool teacher is constantly working at. Unfortunately, more and more our bosses are going to have to work with that, because I think it's becoming a growing problem. It's this idea, okay, in its very simple form, that when you're a little kid, you get mad. You feel your feelings. That is good. Okay? Not feeling your feelings, you're in the realm of repression, but you feel your feelings, but you don't know how to regulate your feelings, therefore you get mad and you hit somebody. Okay? You get happy, you hug somebody. And therefore there isn't an ability to say, is this the right time to hit, or is this the right time to hug? Is this actually helpful to the person? And so you have this deregulation. And, psychology will say, you should work towards becoming a more regulated person. Therefore, yes, you feel your feelings, but you also need to, figure out what is an appropriate reaction to the feeling you're feeling. Okay? This sounds really simple, but any of you guys that are bosses, or any of you that work in the service sector, any of you that have bosses, know that the amount of folks who are actually reasonably well emotionally regulated, even as adults, seems to be a shrinking portion of the population. If you don't believe me or don't know what the heck I'm talking about, just go on your favorite social media and say something political. And you will get, I guarantee you, whether or not you said something on the right or the left, a lot of deregulated people's emotions about your thoughts. Some for it, some against it, but none of them well regulated. And this is a problem. This really undermines Christian spirituality. Why? Because Christian spirituality is about listening to God's call and doing what God called you to do. Which, again, that's the great diversity and adventure that is life. But if you're emotionally unregulated, you don't really do that. We've seen this over the past few years, right? Well, again, putting politics completely out of this for a moment, we've seen one big thing we were all about for a month and a half, and then we forgot totally about it. Then we were all about, as a nation, another big thing for like a month and a half, and then we forgot about it. And then there was this other big thing that everyone was doing on social media or Facebook or whatever, and then we forgot about it. That's emotional deregulation. That's emotionally being unregulated. And that really is a problem, because as Christians, we are called to feed the poor. An emotionally unregulated person is going to be like, I want to feed the poor on Thanksgiving. That'll be fun. I'll feel good about it. I will feel like, look at me, I'm a great person. Doesn't this say I'm a wonderful person? And they'll go and they'll have very big emotions about how they're very for feeding the poor after they do that on Thanksgiving, and then they will walk away, and for the rest of the year, they will not think again about the poor or the oppressed. They'll participate the one time in a march, or they'll put the thing on Facebook or the thing on TikTok where they stand with whomever, and then they won't vote. They won't follow through. And the second it gets hard, man, they're gone. The second it gets difficult, the second there has to be a difficult conversation, because that doesn't feel good, and they're not regulated. So the second they run into something that doesn't feel good, they run away. There's no staying power. And the thing about spirituality is, it's when you stay. It's when you go and do. Not just once, not just twice, but over and over and over, so that you get to build that relationship. You get to experience the struggles, the hardships, the complexities of a situation or of a life or of a person. Is when you grow. That is the spiritual journey. And, well, it's diverse for everyone. It's easy for no one. I've never seen someone spiritually grow from a life of leisure. Like anything, like working out physically, you got to do it hard enough that it hurts a little, or you're not doing it hard enough for it to be worth it. And I think we as a church do an awful job at dealing with people who are emotionally unregulated. We do an awful job because someone who's emotionally unregulated sort of clicks a lot of boxes of what we think we want, right? Because an emotionally unregulated person is really good at jumping on every single bandwagon as it comes along, standing up and looking like a leader who's charging in to say the right thing and look the right way and put the right thing on Facebook at the right moment and be super passionate at that moment about the thing, which they really are. But 3 weeks later, a month later, a year later, another whim, another doctrine, another cause has come along, and they are on that bandwagon, leading the charge, but never starting the car. Now you may say, well, what's the danger in that? Some people are passionate, they jump from one thing to another. And If that's all it meant to be emotionally unregulated, you're probably right. There isn't a lot of danger. I mean, they're never going to get going in that starting line. They're never going to build a deeper spirituality. But let's understand, it's only happenstance that that bandwagon is a good one versus a harmful one. Because whether or not you're doing good, or you believe you're doing good, or perceive you're doing good, and actually doing good, is an issue of stepping back and asking the question. I mean, the greatest evil humanity has ever seen has often done veiled in the bandwagon of goodness. Few people do evil for evil's sake. Most people do evil because they mistake it for good. So unregulated people, as much as they are at the forefront of doing a good thing, though they never follow through, they can be at the forefront of organizing a horrible thing. And if it's something that is going to continue to bother them, they will continue to fight it because they're like a 4-year-old. When they're happy, they'll hug. When they're mad, they'll hit. See, we as Christians, to follow a good Christian life, shouldn't embrace repressing or unregulated emotions. What we gotta do is do that really simple but really hard work of going ahead and doing what every one of our preschool and kindergarten teachers desperately tried to teach us, which is feelings are good. Feel your feelings, but regulate your response. Because you can be angry, but no need to yell, hit, or throw temper tantrums. Advice that is good when you are 4, it is advice that is also good when you're 94. So as you go out this week, take a few minutes in your life and ask yourself, on that spectrum, from repressed to unregulated to regulated, where are you most of the time?